of this year. Before we get started, just a couple of things I want to remind the folks on Zoom with us. Please remember that if you are on Zoom or meeting with us remotely, please mute yourselves unless you're actively speaking, and please use the chat feature to notify staff if you want to be recognized for a question or comment. When answering the attendance roll, please indicate that you are in your LRC office or at your home office as well. With that, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Quorum being present, well, first of all, I want to ask Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Thank you. Senator Adams. Here. Senator Berg.
Present, on my way to the Capitol.
Thank you. Senator Harper Angel.
Present remotely in the district.
Thank you. Senator Storm.
Present remotely in my home district.
Thank you. Senator Westerfield. Thank you. Representative Banta.
Here in the 63rd.
Thank you. Representative Raymond.
Here from my district.
Thank you. Representative Stevenson. Representative Tate.
Present in my home office.
Thank you. Representative Beckler. Representative Meade.
Here. A quorum being is present, the minutes shall reflect so. The first order of business is the election of the Senate Committee Co-Chair as provided by statute. Senate members only will be electing the Co-Chair. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Ben Payne for the nomination process.
Thank you, sir. Is there a nomination from a Senate member for the position of Senate Co-Chair of the committee?
Ben, I would nominate Senator Adams as chair.
Senator Westerfield has nominated Senator Adams. Is there a second for the nomination?
This is
Second.
Senator Second. Yeah, second.
And there's a second by Senator Storm. Is there now a motion that the Senate members that nominations cease and that Senator Adams be elected by acclamation?
So moved.
We have a motion
Second.
by Senator Westerfield and a second by Senator Storm. The motion is made and seconded that nominations cease and that Senator Adams be elected the Senate co-chair by acclamation. With no objection, it is so ordered.
Congratulations, Co-Chair Adams, and this is your meeting. So you may take over.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair, and thank you, Senator Westerfield and Senator Storm. That was very kind of you. Before we get started today, I do want to take a point of personal privilege. If we could have a moment of silence in honor of our former co-chair, Senator Tom Buford, who passed away recently, and all of his many contributions to Kentucky over the years through his service in the state Senate. Thank you. He will be missed. Okay, so let's get into our agenda today. I guess the first order of business, we need to approve the minutes from the November 16th, 2020 meeting. Do I have a motion to? Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, motion and a second. All those in favor of approval of a minute signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, our minutes are approved. Next order of business is item number 4, child sexual abuse and exploitation. Mission challenges. Oh, yeah. Okay, before we get in, you all go ahead and take your seats at the table. While you're taking your seats at the table, we do want to recognize we have several new members on this committee. New happy faces. So we have Senator Karen Berg joining this advisory committee, Senator Brandon Storm, Representative Kim Banta, Representative Josie Raymonds, and Representative Pamela Stevenson. And we have one, and Representative Beckler is our ex officio member. And so I do want to welcome our new members to this committee. It's a great committee. I think we're going to have a robust interim conversation. So I'm really looking forward to everybody's participation. And so with us today at the table, we have some fabulous superstars. Why don't you all go ahead and introduce yourselves for the record, and then we'll go ahead and get started with testimony.
Hello, my name is Heather Wagers, and I'm the Executive Director over the Office of I pushed it on. Okay. There we go. It's green.
Yeah, so all the microphones changed this year. It used to be you just went up and they were on automatically. So anyone who comes to the testimony table, you'll need to turn it on and off each time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So again, I'm Heather Wagers, an Executive Director with the Office of Trafficking and Abuse Prevention and Prosecution for the Office of Attorney General.
Leanna Homenberg. I am the chair of the Operations and Legislative Committee of the Child Sexual Abuse and Exploitation Prevention Board.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Burke. I'm the Assistant Deputy Attorney General over the Criminal Division of the Office of Attorney General.
So the Child Sexual Abuse Exploitation Prevention Board is set up so that in statute that is broken down into ex officio members as well as people that are appointed. General Cameron serves as the chair of the board. I serve as his proxy. And here are the current list of board members. So the Commissioner of the Department of Education, the Secretaries of the Cabinet for Health and Family Services, Finance and Admin Cabinet, and then the Commissioner for State Police. And as Leanna mentioned, she is one of the appointed positions. We are required by law to meet at least 4 times a year. We have a very robust committee and group that we have. So we have 6 meetings scheduled for this year. While the coronavirus pandemic presented unique challenges to all of us, it did create a unique opportunity for the board to expand the number of meetings that we held. We met once in person in 2020 before the pandemic. Thereafter, the meetings were conducted virtually. Grants were awarded in the normal course of business. However, sometimes deliverables had to be modified to adjust with the pandemic. We did have audits this year. In the past year, they were more robust than ever before. And the board was able to adapt to the new environment and make significant strides in our annual responsibilities. The board undertook several measures to improve operations and further their charge. The board adopted revisions to the bylaws that increased oversight of grants and also adopted an anti-discrimination policy. Last year, the board provided an updated strategic plan with new goals to govern our activities. Additionally, the board has explored funding opportunities to participate within KECC, which is the Kentucky Employee Charitable Campaign. KECC requires an annual report, so my office has put together the documentation and we are waiting to see if we are approved. The board advertises its upcoming training and grant solicitations on the I Care About Kids website. We also post about board activities and upcoming training that people may have as it relates to child sexual abuse and exploitation prevention.
All right, so we have 3 standing committees: the Finance and Grants, Management, Research, Development and Training, and then Operations and Legislative, as well as an additional committee just formed at our last board meeting, considering some rebranding of the license plates and the different advertising that we do. The Finance and Grants obviously provides the board each time we meet with a finance report. They have the ability to monitor and revoke any grants that we did give out to individuals, as well as they review all of the grant applications every year that we receive. Research and Development do a lot of our fundraising. Our funds are dwindling, but we are in the works of creating different modes to receive funds. And then obviously Operations and Legislative is part of this fun project of meeting with senators and legislators and different community members to talk about different things that we would like to see as a board push through for legislation. And then Operations as the bylaws and the organization of the board. So this year, I've been on this board for 5 years now, and this is the first time we've done a strategic plan, which has been incredibly helpful. And we laid out 5 different goals that we wanted to have the board at least attempt to get to. And the first goal is obviously to increase public and professional awareness. And these goals have been the same throughout the board's existence, but we wanted to add different things in order to get our names out there more. And one of those, just a couple of things in that first goal, we thought about Facebook advertising. A lot of people don't know that this board exists or what we do. And we also wanted to reach out to different organizations and different professional communities, and then research different activities about different ways that we can put our names out there and advertise at different events. The second one is to fund quality services and innovative programs. In order to do that, however, we do have to fundraise. So that's part of the second goal, is to fundraise, and not only fundraise, but find different ways in order to fund these programs. And some of these programs are grants for education and different programs throughout the state, sometimes with police officers and law enforcement training, as well as prosecutor training as well. The third goal, to have a greater influence on public policy. Some of those goals this year is to meet with those in the industry, social workers, professionals, as well as educating legislative and judicial branches and those involved in those, in order to obviously educate you guys on the things that we would like to see move forward as far as policy. And then goal 4. Is to increase the effectiveness of the board. So the board makes up a varied group of people, especially our public members from across the state. There's a couple of us from Northern Kentucky, some of us from Eastern Kentucky, and we would like to see in the future more growth in the areas that we are located in, as well as bringing diversity to our board, and just increasing the effectiveness that way. And then the last goal, to ensure continued growth and viability of the Child Victims Trust Fund. As I mentioned, the funds do not continue to be the same every year, and they are consistently dwindling, but we offer such great services, as I'll talk about, that we want to make sure that this board continues to be well funded in order to fund the projects that we are all passionate about in this board. So one of the things that we helped with Are They Good for Your Kids campaign. It was an online campaign with Prevent Child Abuse Kentucky. They had these plastered on different buses and transportation throughout the entire state of Kentucky, Lexington, Louisville, and Northern Kentucky. And it was just an informative campaign about how to watch out for online grooming and different adult influences in your kids' lives. So that was one thing that the board did and helped fund. Another thing that the board funds are the child sexual medical exams. In the state of Kentucky, we're actually number 1 in the country for child maltreatment, and the board issues payment to different CAC providers who do medical exams for those who have come forth with sexual allegations. So we recently, just in our last couple meetings, increased. It used to be $75 that we would reimburse the individuals performing these medical exams. We increased that to $100 because we were told that the $75, while it was helpful, was not being as effective, and the cost of the exams are exponential, that the $75 wasn't really doing it justice. So we increased that to $100, while being mindful of our finances. And from 2019 to 2020, the numbers did decrease in the amount of medical exams, but physicians said that they were even though there was less exams performed, they were some of the most severe cases that they witnessed in those medical exams. And then these are our grant recipients. So every year we put out different grants, statewide and regional grants, and we have hours-long meetings regarding how we're going to allocate the funds that we have. And the statewide grants, we decided on Kentucky Kids on the Block, and then Prevent Child Abuse Kentucky. And that $32,000 was towards that campaign 2 slides ago. And then Kentucky Kids on the Block, I believe, is in South Central Kentucky, and they do a lot of puppeteer shows, and I think it reaches 15,000 kids across several school districts. And then the regional grants, the CAC centers, and then the Family Nurturing Center, and then the Exploited Children's Help Organization. Again, these are 50-plus long-page applications that we review, that the Grants Committee reviews, and then we present to the board, and then we go through and allocate the amount of money that we want to see go to these different programs. And then Child Advocacy Week, again, just another way to continue having a public policy and voice in for our kids. We advocate, obviously, for this Child Advocacy Week, and a couple of those policy initiatives are increasing the statute of limitations for child victims, and then increasing the penalty of those that possess or view child sexual abuse material of victims under the age of 12. So those are two things that we are looking at pushing through in the next couple of years as a board. And then every year we do Child Advocacy Center site visits. So all of the CAC centers that we provide money to, we go and make sure that they're compliant, and also just do a wellness check-in visit. And I believe those are done I don't even know, June? Sorry.
So they are done periodically between April and September. We would love to have them done before the fiscal year, but I will tell you that it's a very robust season and we're traveling all over the state. Each of these visits take at least half a day, and that's not counting travel time, because we really want to spend time with the individuals asking what they're seeing in the communities. And so we want to take our time with that, and that requires a lot of additional travel.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. Okay. We also do regional training as well. Again, what I mentioned earlier with some of the law enforcement as well as prosecutor training. And these are just some of the other things that we fund. Happy to answer any questions about that. And I think that's it. And then Kentuckians Helping Kids. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Co-Chair Adams and everyone for having us here today. I greatly appreciate it. I was going to talk a little bit about what the Attorney General's office has been doing with some of the funds and the support provided by the board, and some ideas that we could have moving forward. Anything that we go out and train on at the Kentucky Attorney General's office is always trauma informed as it relates to sexual assaults. One thing that I think is important to today's conversation is to understand that rarely do children face one form of maltreatment or abuse. The statistics bear out, and it is common that these children are experiencing multiple forms, which could include physical, emotional, all kinds of abuse along those lines. So that's one reason to kind of expand the purview from just this narrow idea of sexual abuse. There's some great things that we have done this past year. We were able to obtain through an application the People from Zero Abuse Project, who just focus on purely their goal is to eradicate all forms of child maltreatment in the United States. We were able to partner with them to bring some really great training to our state on behalf of our prosecutors, both county and Commonwealth attorneys, who both face very specific and different roles in this fight. County attorneys, of course, as Senator Westerfield can attest, handle child maltreatment court or dependency abuse neglect court. They are statutorily, they are charged with going in there and taking these cases up. In a lot of ways, that is both a reactive and a preventive step towards eradication of child abuse. Hopefully they can catch families before children become victims of some much more serious forms of abuse. So the training was tailored to their needs and goals as it relates to dependency abuse neglect court. It was also tailored to Commonwealth attorneys who are reactive and largely handle these very serious and horrible cases of child abuse, sexual and physical, after it has occurred. Within that, there were such trainings on the importance of corroborating a child's statement, so that when you sit in a CAC interview, which the board so generously funds, and those CAC interviews are the most important thing to our cases, it talks about you should at least pull 25 facts out of each of those interviews that corroborate that child, so that children don't become the one piece of evidence in these cases, that there is other evidence out there to show a jury that you should believe them, that they are telling the truth, and that they do need your protection. Also within that, there were trainings on how to sharpen your cross-examination skills when you're dealing with defense witnesses, how to handle your CAC interviews in the era of the pandemic. So this past year, a lot of our CAC interviews were done remotely. And that is, of course, going to be a challenge to prosecutors as they get in court and defense counsel starts to challenge some of those. So that was handled in these trainings. The Kentucky Prosecutors Institute was like a amuse-bouche. It was like the lead up, this little taste of what was to come later, which was the 2021 Kentucky Stark Prosecutor Symposium. STARK stood for Stopping the Technology-Assisted Abuse of Rural Children, and it really focused on the importance of technology in these types of crimes. Technology, of course, is where all crimes are going. If you all read recently, a lot of people were talking about the Fitbit case where they solved a murder through the victim's Fitbit information, which they subpoenaed. I can tell you that in the STARK conference, we learned that there was a child abuse case that was successfully prosecuted because they were able to obtain pacemaker information from the offender, which kind of blew their case out of the water. So technology is where things are going, and I think a lot of people think about cell towers and all this kind of stuff and cell phones when it comes to murders. We often kind of don't think of child abuse cases and rape cases and sexual assault cases as being at that level. They are every bit, if not harder, than murder cases. They are every bit as technology assisted, maybe more so. So that was a very important amount of training that we brought to prosecutors. Also, we, through a very generous partnership with the Kentucky State Police, they are hosting a number of our prosecutors to go to in Dallas, Texas, not to go to virtually. They're able to watch all the content between August and December at the National Crimes Against Children Conference, which is held out to be the premier conference and training ground for professionals that, whether it be law enforcement, prosecutors, social workers, or other allied professionals that sort of fight this fight on behalf of children. And you can see there of some of the great content that our Kentucky prosecutors, I think we're sending 27 or so prosecutors to this, and you can see some of the great content that they will be able to get a hold of and hopefully bring back to their areas and use to combat and strengthen the cases they have. We also put together a child abuse prosecution toolkit. It's available on our website. I want to point out that Dr. Sugarman, who you will be hearing from next, was a big help in that. So this was something that we worked with a lot of people on to try to give some resources and tools and places where you can go get training and watch best practices as it relates to working within your multidisciplinary teams, which is so crucial to these cases being viable and good and winnable. So that was something that also happened. A special shout out to the Child Sexual Assault Prevention Board. We had a couple of cases in Kentucky this year where our prosecutors wanted to use experts, and they had to go through Daubert proceedings, and of course they had to pay for the experts to come and talk to juries to try to fight against some of these myths and common misconceptions that might be held by the public out there as it relates to child abuse. One is that kids disclose quickly. They do not. One is that there will be a lot of trauma or physical injury to a child after sexual abuse. There is usually not. So they were able to step up and provide some funding through our office that we could then turn over to the prosecutors in the state so they could obtain these experts on these very important cases and go into court and try to fight a battle on a more level playing field and educate the juries about exactly the type of case that they were hearing of. So we couldn't have done that, again, without the partnership of this board. So very important. With that, we are happy to field any questions, concerns, or comments that any of you may have.
I'm actually going to go back a couple slides so that you hear more about the Child Victims Trust Fund, if that's okay, Senator Adams.
No, that's exactly what I was going to ask. So, because I can't see it on this because I don't have my readers, and I was like, so I'm glad you're going back.
Yes. So, as mentioned earlier, the board was created to oversee the Child Victims Trust Fund. The Child Victims Trust Fund receives money through private donations, proceeds from the purchase of the I Care About Kids license plate, and donations made through the state income tax check-off program, as well as just regular donations that we may receive. So As you can tell by the numbers on the slide, we don't receive a lot of money from the income tax checkoff program. In fiscal year 20, we received $50. In fiscal year 21, we received $265 for all donations for the entire year. And a lot of that was with a new program that we've kind of spotlighted, which was the Giving Tuesday campaign to try to raise awareness about the Child Victims Trust Fund. We find that most people are unfamiliar with the trust fund and are not aware of it, so that's the reason why donations are minimal. Historically, that has been the case ever since it's been created. In 2017, it was an exception because somebody left their estate to the Child Victims Trust Fund, and so that totaled up to $172,000, and so all of those dollars went to the trust fund. This is just one image of the graphic that we use at the Office of Attorney General to raise awareness about the Child Victims Trust Fund. So, by and large, the license plate sales is the largest driver of revenue for the Child Victims Trust Fund. It's set forth in statute that we are to receive $10 for the initial purchase of a license plate and then $5 for the renewal. Administrative costs come out of that, so we don't see that full 10 and 5. But this is kind of a projection based on what we've seen over the past year. And this is the historical showing that the largest revenue source is the license plate. However, even at its peak, it's a little bit above $100,000, and we spend over $100,000 every year, no matter what, just funding programs.
Yeah.
Again, here's some revenue generated. As you'll see in 2018, the high number for donations is because of that individual who left to the fund. The past 4 years, fiscal years, as you can see, there's a decline, and that's because we spend about $300,000 to $400,000 just funding the child advocacy centers and the 4 or 5 regional and statewide programs. Nothing else. This board is so fiscally conservative. We want to make sure that every single dollar is going to evidence-based, important work to help prevent child sexual abuse. And now we are at the end of our presentation. So if you have any questions, we are happy to answer them.
Yes, I have a couple. I'm sure that our committee members will have a few. So help me kind of understand the dollars. So you all have operational dollars and you have trust fund dollars. Is that correct? And generally, what do you spend in operations and what do you spend in trust fund and what do you hold back?
So we have operational dollars, although we are as bare bones as possible. Even though my office provides all of the administrative support to that, we do not charge that against the trust fund. So the only thing that gets operationally charged to the trust fund is for site visits. For example, if it takes me 2 or 3 days to cover Western Kentucky, it would require an overnight stay. And so that's the only type of additional kind of one-offs. And so every once in a while you'll see a $300 bill here or things of that nature. But I use pool cars, state cars, so we try to save as much money as possible.
And then everything else comes out of the trust?
Yes.
Okay. And no general fund dollars?
No general fund dollars.
Okay. And I noticed it said that the license plate is the biggest funder of the trust. Are you required to hold back any dollars? I guess it's really hard to make financial decisions for the trust when you don't know what's this year is going to look like.
It is. Thankfully, it is a rotating, recurring fund, so the money just keeps going back in the fund. If we don't spend it, unfortunately, we spend more than we receive, and that is not a recipe for good fiscal management. But we have so many amazing programs. You know, we're #1 in the country for child maltreatment, and while child sexual abuse is only 3%. You know, each one of those victims, they need assistance. They need the services that the Child Advocacy Center provides. We need to do more preventive efforts to raise awareness so that we can prevent it on the front end. And so while we are fiscally conservative, we do outspend what we take in every year.
And I guess my last, I don't know if this is a comment or a question, but it's kind of to your point. You know, it's a low percentage that is sexual abuse, but we are number one in child abuse and neglect. And so that is a whole another huge encompassing piece of this. I guess, would your all's board or the Attorney General be opening to expanding your scope beyond sexual abuse to neglect? I know that'll put you on the spot, but it seems to me to be, if we're going to tackle holistically abuse and neglect and sexual abuse, that all of those things run together and they're all interrelated, and they seem to me to be a logical place for us to go. Anyways, so that's why I said, I'm like, it could be a comment, it could be a question, but I don't want to put you on the spot.
That's okay. So our office would look forward to, obviously I can only speak for the Office of Attorney General, but I think the board is would feel very similar to this. Our office would look forward to all the support and resources that it would be needed to undertake that endeavor. You know, in Kentucky, the reports are 2 years behind in the sense of how they report at the national level. So 95.5% of all maltreatment in Kentucky was neglect for 2019. There were so many contributive factors that were associated with that. Drug abuse was present in over half of the cases presented, as well as domestic violence, inadequate housing. We are finding that these things do not happen in a vacuum. Usually what is making a child vulnerable to child sexual abuse begins with potentially neglect, or makes them vulnerable in the sense they are left alone, or maybe they're not aware of what their child is doing online, and their child is being exposed to things that leads to future victimization.
And I'll go ahead and hog all the time because nobody else, I don't think, has a question. Yeah, go ahead, please, Senator Burke. Yes. No.
Thank you, Senator Adams. So I'm sorry I was late. There was a huge backup on 64. So I just want to clarify, because this is all new to me. Did you all say that you had a case in Kentucky where we had to basically go to what looks to me to be pretty much private funding, fundraising, to hire prosecutors for a sexual abuse case? No,
you misunderstood.
Okay, thank you.
No, we did not have to do that, ma'am.
Okay.
But thank you for the question, Senator Burke. Now, what I had indicated was a lot of times in criminal cases, there's the use of experts. They don't get used as often as perhaps we would like to, because prosecutors are fiscally, we have budgets, and the money is pretty scarce, and a lot of the funding that goes to prosecutors' offices is operational. It's not for sort of these extra things. And so in some of these cases, we applied for, when I say we, I mean prosecutors applied for, through CSAP, a grant to go out and hire an expert to come in. So this is someone that works within the field, works with victims of child sexual abuse, and they're able to dispel some of the myths to a jury, like that children would automatically tell if something bad happened to them, which is not the case. The most common finding in child sexual abuse as far as a physical exam is no finding at all, which is counterintuitive to most people, but is true. And so a lot of times the only way you're going to get that in and be able to render an opinion to a jury is through an expert. And where some prosecutors' offices lack the resources to go out, and we always try, whether it be however, they were able to step up and provide funding so that we could get an expert to come in to try to handle these cases. Just makes the cases a lot stronger.
Thank you. I understand that. I guess my concern is that the funding wouldn't have just automatically been available if it was needed.
Yeah.
I guess that's my concern.
They have to submit an application if it's coming through our Child Victims Trust Fund that we administer.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I guess I'll just wrap up. But, one of the things that I think is, we're number one. We've been number one for the last 3 years in child abuse and neglect. We've got to get off that number one ranking. And I don't know how you get off of it when we have a trust fund that's unstable. You can't forecast for it. It's extremely specialized. I mean, I think that we are going to have to talk about how we approach taking care of these kids and also the prevention aspect, and we're going to have to figure out a more stable system. So I guess one of the things that I want you all either to think about or even comment here is the license plates are good, but they just don't seem to be cutting it. And if we are going to try to get off that number one ranking, what can we do to broaden the mission or broaden the ability to collect dollars to promote that mission? And I don't know if they're general fund dollars. I don't know if they're grant fund dollars. I don't know what they are, but I would rely on your tell us how we can do it better than we're doing now. No disrespect, but I think we all want to come off that number one ranking, and we need to all help each other.
Absolutely. So I have done a lot of research in this area because I do want to see that we are no longer number one in this area. Most of the child victims trust funds across the state, like 45 or so, focus on all forms of maltreatment. We are very specialized here in Kentucky. We are one of few that actually focus on just sexual abuse exploitation. Now, Illinois is the only state that does not have any child victims trust fund, but all of the ones around us, Ohio, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, Indiana, Missouri, Michigan, Wisconsin, it is all forms of child abuse that they are looking into. I've also looked at how their states are fundraising because we are constantly looking for new ideas. And so in Michigan, they have this amazing auction. They also sell heirloom birth certificates, or they get a percentage from every birth certificate that Vital Statistics issues, because that's a good way of putting money back towards the children. In Virginia, they focus on addressing all family violence and trauma. So they have a $15 of a $25 license plate fee goes to the Victims Trust Fund without any administrative costs coming out. Obviously, there's lots of consideration with that. Michigan, 20% of their entire funding comes from general funds. So there's different things going on across the nation, and we would love to have further conversations about ways that we can stabilize and sustain this trust fund.
Great, thank you. And I'll follow up, because that is interesting what other states are doing. I mean, beg, borrow, and steal wherever you can on those good ideas. So thank you. Any questions from committee members? All right, seeing none, I appreciate your all's testimony. It was nice to have you all here today.
Thank you.
All right, next up to the table is we've got the Children's Advocacy Centers of Kentucky. Looks like we're going to have two presenters. I don't know if your microphones are on, but they're not automatically on anymore. So I'd love it if you all could introduce yourselves for the record and just go ahead and begin your testimony.
Okay. Laura Kretzer, Director of Strategic Initiatives and Programming.
I'm Jacqueline Sugarman. I'm a child abuse pediatrician. I'm from the University of Kentucky, as well as from the medical director of the Children's Advocacy Center of the Bluegrass and the medical director for the Children's Advocacy Centers of Kentucky.
You can begin.
On behalf of the There it goes. On behalf of the Children's Advocacy Centers of Kentucky, thank you for having us today to talk about the work of our 15 member centers and their services to the most vulnerable children in all 120 Kentucky counties. Caroline Rochelle continues to serve as executive director, and she sends her regrets that she could not join you herself today. While many of you are familiar with the work of Children's Advocacy Centers, we will take a few minutes to review the CAC model and then focus on the growth and trends of CAC services specific to Kentucky and opportunities for systems improvements. Then Dr. Sugarman will share important information about medical services that are so critical to abused children and the role of CACs in Kentucky in providing this care. Children's Advocacy Centers of Kentucky promotes, assists, and supports the development, growth, and continuation of children's advocacy centers in Kentucky, which are the coalition of 15 regionally designated programs. CAC Kentucky is an accredited chapter of the National Children's Alliance. Every allegation of child abuse is serious, and a child is at the heart of each case. However, there are many professionals who are responsible for a part of the quest for justice and healing for each child. Before the CAC model, there was often confusion, lack of coordination, and repeated interviews by untrained professionals, leaving the child without critically needed services to heal and harming the investigative process, putting children at risk for further harm. The Children's Advocacy Center model, which the Kentucky legislature adopted through statute and regulation in the early 2000s, provides coordinated expert services that put the child and their caregiver at the center through a network of CACs in each area development district. CACs advocate on behalf of children alleged to have been abused, provide a child-friendly, psychologically safe location to assist in the investigation, promote coordination of services, and provide many direct services to children. Key services include forensic interviewing, trauma-focused mental health services, court advocacy, support services, expert consultation, training, and staffing of multidisciplinary teams. Here is a brief video showing what children and families faced before CACs and how CACs now bring services together to help children access justice and find healing.
A Children's Advocacy Center, or CAC, provides support to victims of child abuse. Without a CAC, an abused child may have to tell their story over and over again in settings that may be scary or where kids may think that they're in trouble. Then, families have to search around for the services their children need, all on their own. But in a CAC, a child tells their story to a trained interviewer who makes the process gentle on the child and finds the facts which are crucial to the child's case. Then, a community of professionals in medicine, law enforcement and child protective services, prosecution, victim advocacy, and other heroes work through the CAC to decide the best way to help the child. And CACs provide science-backed mental health care that heals kids from trauma and helps them reclaim their futures. This community of caring professionals rallies around the child so children have everything they need, all in one place, at the CAC. To find your local CAC or to sign up for updates, visit nationalchildren'salliance.org.
Federal funding from the Victims of Crime Act to CACs increased significantly beginning in 2017, providing needed resources to keep up with the demand for services, establish satellite locations in 7 regions, improve technology, and most importantly, increase direct service to staff. 2 additional CACs are currently in discussions with community partners to establish services in outlying counties. So this map shows you the CACs by region with the green stars representing the satellite locations that have been established or are planned to be established. Funds from VOCA currently comprise approximately 50% of the budgets of the CACs in Kentucky. However, VOCA funding is in jeopardy, with the Kentucky Justice and Public Safety Cabinet stating that CACs should expect award amounts to decline by 30% beginning this October, which is approximately $2 million. VOCA is not funded by tax dollars, but it's funded by fines at the federal level from convictions. But due to statutory languages, fines that are collected on federal cases from alternatives to trial are not deposited into this crime victim fund. This situation was made worse by COVID because of the increased difficulty of taking cases to trial. A bill is awaiting a vote in the U.S. Senate to fix the funding formula, but even if Congress passed the bill today, it would take several years for the fund to heal. At the same time, despite the pandemic, Kentucky CACs are on track for services in fiscal year 21 to more than compensate for the brief dip in children served at the beginning of the pandemic when reports of abuse dropped. Kentucky CACs remained open and adapted to continuing to serve children safely during the pandemic, providing direct services, community outreach, and telemental health services. CACs adapted their staffing structures to minimize the risk of having all of their specialized staff out for quarantine at one time in case of a workplace exposure. CACs purchased secure conferencing technology to be able to continue to hold the confidential case review meetings. And CACs needed more time to serve each child and family in order to maintain the cleaning and distancing guidelines. And CACs did report an increase in the severity of the abuse reports that did come to their attention. Additionally, the statistics do show that there is an increase in the number of victim advocacy services per child, and that does indicate a higher level of need for the children that are served. And we are thankful that programs were able to access CARES funding at the end of 2020 through a contract with the Cabinet for Health and Family Services to help mitigate the risk of providing direct services to the public. We do not know the full impact of COVID-19 on child abuse, but we do know that several factors increase that are correlated with an increase in child abuse. Many households experienced unemployment, increased stress, social isolation, substance misuse, and decreased access to childcare. And with public life beginning to return to normal, children will have increased access to trusted adults who may recognize the signs of abuse and make a report. Reports of child abuse typically increase every year in August when school resumes, and we expect that trend will continue this year, possibly to a greater degree. Now is not the time for reduced services to these specialized services for abused children. With the reduction in VOCA funding, we are requesting $2 million in each fiscal year from the American Rescue Plan Act to replace this loss in revenue, which would maintain the current staffing levels and maintain that geographic accessibility. They're both so critical. And we're also requesting $900,000 to provide an additional mental health therapist at each CAC to address the anticipated increase in mental health needs. As you saw in the video, the heart of services at a CAC is the multidisciplinary team approach, particularly one that is well coordinated and matches the right child with the right service. These MDTs are established in statute to ensure the immediate and future safety of the child victim, minimize further trauma, assist in healing, increase the quality of sexual abuse investigations, and facilitate the efficient and appropriate disposition of cases through the criminal justice system. The MDT is comprised of prosecutors, law enforcement officers, child protection workers, medical and mental health professionals, victim advocates, CAC staff, and educators. The team is charged with coordinated investigations, providing services to victims, and meeting together at least monthly for confidential case review. CACs of Kentucky has prioritized enhancing the implementation of this MDT model in Kentucky. And as a part of an MDT enhancement project, 3 centers have participated in a pilot project with the centralized intake system beginning in October of 2019. Hope's Place in Ashland and the Northern Kentucky Children's Advocacy Center in Florence both piloted this program in their home county, and Lotus and Paducah piloted this program in Graves County, where they do not have a physical location. When a report of abuse is made to centralized intake, for the reports that are accepted, the specialist routes this report to the DCBS investigator as well as to law enforcement investigators, including prosecutors. And this is statutory. In this project, These reports were also routed to the CAC early in the process. With partial funding through the Children's Justice Act Task Force, these CACs provided expert reviews of every report of child abuse and neglect in the target county. Initially, they reviewed reports to learn about the universe of cases investigated in their community and to identify trends and potential needs. Previously, CACs would only learn of a report of abuse when an individual investigator would contact them to request a service, or the investigator brought the information to the MDT case review meeting. CACs were flying blind to the potential need in their community. As the project progressed, CACs began active outreach to the investigators to coordinate services for those children who met criteria for the MDT response or a CAC service. And beginning in January of this year, these CACs tracked more closely that response for the response and services provided to those individual children who met the criteria. They then compared this to a baseline month from before they began the outreach on the cases. And the data is really striking and demonstrate that this outreach, coordination, and relationship building means that more children who need these services received the care that they needed. These next charts are all very similar, with this first one indicating MDT response, with the first set of lines being the baseline month, and then January through May showing the percentage of children who received services who met criteria for the services. The next chart is for forensic interviewing, for mental health services, and for victim advocacy services. So we can see that trend continued, and that CAC involvement at this early stage helped achieve the true intent of the Kentucky statutes and regulations for both CACs and MDTs. Ultimately, more children and families receive the care they need to heal from abuse. So based on this pilot project, we're seeing that CACs are serving, at best, no more than 2/3 of the kids who are out there who need and deserve a multidisciplinary team response to their allegation of child abuse. We see the great value of including CACs early in the investigative process, and of CACs dedicating staff resources to these efforts to coordinate the services. Recognizing that at a minimum, another 1/3 of children can benefit from this response who need it, we are asking for an investment in the work of CACs to support this type of coordination and the increase in services that would go along with it, the very response that's consistent with Kentucky statutes. We request $5 million in general operating funds each year to support this work. And detailed calculations about all of the funding requests are included in your handouts, as well as a full report about the Multidisciplinary Enhancement Project. And now Dr. Sugarman will share important information focused on the medical needs of abused children and share with you just a couple of examples of the many children who've benefited from CAC services and MDT response. Thank you.
So thank you for the opportunity to allow me to speak about the importance of the medical examinations that occur at Children's Advocacy Centers. I wanted to start just by telling you about two of the children that have come to the CAC in the last several months to illustrate why CACs are so important. And the first child I want to talk about, I've altered the names of these children, but the first child I want to talk about is a kid named Sam, who is a middle schooler, came to reside with his current caregiver for about a year before he finally disclosed that he had been the victim of sexual assault. And during the time that he was residing with the caregiver, he had had anger outbursts. He had difficulty sleeping. He was in virtual school, and he told the teacher that he wanted to strangle himself, so he went to a psychiatric facility. He subsequently went to 2 other psychiatric facilities, and finally, when he got released the third time, he got in the car with his caregiver, and he said, "I have something to tell you." And he said, I was raped. And that started a process where he came to the Children's Advocacy Center, and he made a very clear disclosure of what had happened to him, and then he was referred for a medical exam. And he and his caregiver came expressly because he wanted some reassurance about his body, and also he wanted to make sure that he didn't have any sexually transmitted infections. The other child that I wanted to just talk about is a little girl named Ellie, who high schooler, who went to a church camp, and part of that church camp, they had a sex education workshop there. And she told me, she said it took her 2 days, and she agonized for 2 days whether she was going to tell the counselor or not what had happened to her. But she started to really worry about sexually transmitted diseases and pregnancy, and in her own words, whether she was damaged or not. And so she told this church counselor what had happened, and fortunately the church counselor did the right thing and made a report of child abuse to the hotline, and she also was referred to the Children's Advocacy Center for evaluation. So I wanted to talk about these kids and talk about then, why we do these medical exams and how why they're so important. After that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about how our work was impacted by COVID-19, and then address some of the opportunities that I see for growth for the medical community to address the problems that children in our Commonwealth have regarding abuse. So the first thing I wanted to just talk about was where these children are getting evaluated. And I put two pictures up here just to illustrate the contrast. So, we have some wonderful emergency departments in the state. And certainly if I were in a car accident, I would tell you to take me to either UK or U of L to a level 1 trauma center. But for a child who's made a disclosure of sexual abuse that was so difficult to talk about to begin with, I think it's really difficult to not go to a place which is more, and I'm pointing this out here, which is more private, where people are used to kids who are making disclosures like this, and which is really more child-friendly. Imagine you're a middle school boy and you're going to the emergency department, and you're worried about who you're going to tell that this happened to you, and then you're worried that people will overhear you, or who's going to recognize you in that place. So I think for that reason, children's advocacy centers are an ideal venue for children to be evaluated. Again, I just put some pictures in here to contrast, the emergency department, which has a lot of important equipment, as you can see, for resuscitation. But we have the Children's Advocacy Center, which has some more child-friendly things to make children comfortable. We also have some special equipment that I'm going to get to in a minute as well. And just another picture of the emergency department versus the advocacy center. But we do, as I alluded to, have some state-of-the-art equipment at the Children's Advocacy Center as well that makes it really important for kids to be seen someplace where one of the things we use is photo documentation. And we use that documentation, this instrument to document injuries. We take pictures to document injuries. Also, because one thing is, because we can take a picture, sometimes we can do an exam pretty quickly. And that way, we can review the images after the child's already left. And that really helps a lot of children because we don't have to spend a lot of time looking at sensitive areas of the body. And then finally, this helps us if we have to show another another physician, or if we have to show them the finding for additional help. That helps us because sometimes we don't have to send the child to see another provider. We can show the picture instead. And I can tell you we had a situation not too long ago where we had a child who was very traumatized, who had to see the surgeon, and by being able to take some images, she did not have to see that male surgeon at all. He was able to look at the images and try to plot what needed to happen for her next. So it was really very useful for that reason. And so as medical providers in children's advocacy centers, we really want to make sure that we have qualified examiners that provide child-focused and developmentally appropriate exams for children that are trauma-informed. And we certainly want to follow that mantra that we took an oath as doctors to do, and that's do no harm. I will say that, there are a lot of, excellent doctors in ERs and pediatricians' office and family practice offices, but that studies have looked at this issue, and they have they've supported the fact that doctors don't get a lot of training in child abuse, and certainly not child sexual abuse, during their residency, which is the training period. There's just too many other things they have to learn. You have to learn about kidney disease, heart disease, infectious diseases. And so the training that they get during the residency period is very limited. And so we have to make sure that people that are doing these exams have that specialized training that's necessary, not only to see and evaluate the child properly, but subsequently, as was already talked about, to be able to testify in court and to make sure that something happens after the child leaves our office that's going to be appropriate for the child, and then for any other future victims as well. And so doctors that are CAC providers receive special training up front before they ever start. They also receive ongoing training. There's requirements for ongoing training. They are required to peer review abnormal findings so that we are making sure that our findings are consistent, and that we don't ever want to put somebody in jail for something or say that somebody had an exam that was abnormal if they don't. So we peer review our findings, and we make sure that everyone's up to date on the child abuse, sexual abuse medical literature. And so there are a lot of purposes for the exam. For the two children that I talked about, they were certainly concerned about sexually transmitted diseases. But the other, if a child comes to the CAC soon enough, sometimes there is an opportunity to collect some biological and trace evidence to put in what we call that SAFE kit, or that sexual assault forensic evidence kit that the state police submit to the crime lab. We perform head-to-toe examinations, and I know you all already asked a question about physical abuse and neglect, and I will say that we see a lot of children who have suffered sexual abuse have also been neglected, and sometimes physical abuse as well. So we always look at every child from head to toe. We do a comprehensive assessment in terms of history taking from the parent and the child, and we try to assess other risk factors that would go along with neglect, substance abuse, and things that would put the child at risk. We want to, again, treat infection. We want to look for evidence of injury, even though we talked about sometimes there is no injury present, especially if the abuse disclosure is delayed. We want to look for other explanations, as I mentioned. We want to make sure that the child doesn't need any other services. And we want to also make sure that their emotional needs are addressed as well. And then certainly, as in the case of the girl that I talked about, we want to make sure that the child knows that she is okay. I also want to mention sometimes, even though a child has been seen previously by another provider, it is important for a child to come and have some follow-up services at the Children's Advocacy Center. And I won't go into all of these today in the interest of time, but sometimes there is if the provider is not comfortable with what they're doing in the emergency department or in a doctor's office, we need to see those children children again. Sometimes if they have an acute injury, we want to make sure the injury is healed. If they have an infection, we need to make sure the infection is cured. If they have received, for instance, HIV prophylaxis in the ER as a result of acute assault, we need to make sure they're taking their medicine properly, because that's a 1-month commitment of medication. So there's a lot of reasons why we see kids again. And then certainly we, again, want to assess their mental health and their continued safety. And that's important because there's a lot of science now and evidence to support that adverse childhood experiences that are unaddressed can affect kids later on. And this is a diagram from the CDC, but you can see here that all the abuse that we've already mentioned today, and including sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, neglect, those are all ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. And another diagram from the CDC shows you that, when these things are not addressed in childhood, they can be associated with negative outcomes later on, including chronic disease like cancer and diabetes, infectious diseases like HIV and STDs, and certainly also mental health issues as well. Here's another slide just talking about some of the ones specifically associated with sexual abuse. So why is that so important? Well, certainly it's important for the child themselves and the child's family to address sexual abuse and other kinds of abuse. But there is an economic burden for all of us in society if these things aren't addressed. And it is estimated from CDC data that the total lifetime economic burden of child sexual abuse in the United States, at least in 2015, was estimated to be $9.3 billion. So that's a huge cost to society. And so, having said that, just as the child's trauma does not end once they've come to the CAC, they need to have their problem addressed emotionally. The work of the CDC, the CAC medical provider doesn't end as well. And we've already, the other presenters have already talked about the importance of litigating these cases properly. And so one job that the medical provider has to do, which is important, is to communicate their impression of what happened to the child and their findings with other community partners. So we have to be able to communicate those findings with the investigators, convince the police that this is a case that needs to be investigated and go forward, talk to social service investigators and make sure they understand, why children don't disclose immediately, why sometimes they don't have any signs. They're the perfect A student, model behavior, and yet they've been abused. So we have to be able to convince them of that and talk to them about those things. We generate a detailed report that can be used in court. Sometimes we have to go to court ourselves. We have to be able to assess and interpret lab results, and we have to, again, peer review those findings. So this is different than, you take your child to the doctor's office for strep throat. They swab the throat. They say, you have strep throat, take the amoxicillin. You're done. This is much different because the work does not end when the child leaves the office. It's really just beginning. As we've already talked about with that multidisciplinary team and the model of the CACs, so once the initial work in the first, as you can see in that top box, happens, the forensic interview, evidence, if it could be collected, the medical exam, then all the investigators and community partners need to come together to discuss how to best serve that child. And some of that involves law enforcement and the investigative piece. Some of it involves the mental health providers and the doctors trying to figure out what to do for the child's emotional their minds and their bodies, and some of it has to do with the family advocate trying to decide how to help the family. Because, as you know, children aren't, have to go back to the family at the end of the day, and the parent has to, or the caretaker is the one that has to, deals with the child for the rest of the time that the child's not in school or, not in your office, obviously. And so Laura's already mentioned those advantages of that multidisciplinary team, which the CAC is an integral part of. And again, medical professionals are members of that multidisciplinary team. And so, again, the medical professionals' role in that team is to, make recommendations. We hear about kids, and sometimes we're asked if a child needs to have medical exams. Sometimes we review medical records from other providers to help determine if and when they need that exam. We review lab results to make sure we can determine if a child needs any sexually transmitted disease testing, so things like that. And we also discuss with the community partners why an exam may be normal or abnormal. And so, I want to say that sexual abuse, we really don't know how common this problem is. We know that there are a lot of people, and they come to our office all the time with their children, who will say, as we're talking, I've never told anybody this before, but I was abused as a child. And we know that people take this information to their grave. So, I heard that number earlier, 3%. I think that the child abuse clearinghouse data is a little bit higher. I want to say maybe 10 or 11% of the abuse, if you make a big pie chart. And certainly neglect is the biggest part of that pie chart. Usually it's about 70 or 75%. But again, I don't know that we know the whole scope of the problem. In addition to the fact that disclosures are delayed, we often have a lot of little kids. And, those kids, we have little kids and we have developmentally delayed children too. And those children are, they're the perfect victims, I would say, because they don't have the language to often communicate what has happened to them. So we don't know the whole scope of the problem. But again, the research has indicated that, 1 in 4 girls and probably 1 in 13 boys will experience some form of sexual abuse in childhood. So that is a big number. And as far as adolescents go, I'll just mention here, I don't want to read the whole slide, but that teens ages 16 to 19 are about 3.5 more times likely than the general population to be victims of rape, attempted rape, or sexual assault. And who is abusing children? Well, while the relationship of the people abusing kids to the victim can be variable, the majority of kids that are abused by people they know. This is according to the CDC, 91%. And about a third of kids are abused by family members. So this is really important, especially in the context of what we've all just experienced with this pandemic, because we've been cooped up with, family members. And we've had a lot of children in families that we really don't know what happened to them this past year yet. And I think we're only beginning to find out. So in addition to being cooped up with people that may have increased the time they spent with an alleged perpetrator, they had very little outlet to make a disclosure of abuse because school was online for a big period of time. Extracurricular activities where sometimes the child might tell a coach or another trusted adult were curtailed as well. And children had limited access to support services. So, I pulled this Associated Press study that really gave some shocking information that said that child abuse and neglect reports from schools fell sharply by 59%. So as Laura mentioned, I think we're just going to start to find out about school-age children and, if the reports are going to increase once they go back to school. This was some information from Interpol, which also was talking about what happened during the pandemic. And we know that kids did a lot of things online during the pandemic. They could have chatted with people. They socialized through games, and boredom could have led to increased risk taking and sharing information with potential offenders. And I will say anecdotally that we've seen a lot of those children at the CAC this year, a lot of teens, it seems more than usual, who met people during this pandemic online. And so we did, as Laura said, it was quite a challenge, and it seems like it's been a very long year, but we really did, we were able to serve a lot of kids despite the pandemic. We instituted a lot of precautions that were quite cumbersome at times, but we were able to serve a great deal of kids that way. I think one of the silver linings of this pandemic, right before the pandemic started, the Kentucky Association for Sexual Assault Prevention Programs Advisory Committee established a subcommittee that would create a medical protocol for sexual abuse that could be used across the state. And we met weekly, sometimes more than once a week, a group of people, physicians, sexual assault nurse examiners, a representative from the crime lab, and prosecutors to work on this medical protocol. And I'm really pleased to say that we have completed that project. We've also completed a list of training recommendations to be used for statewide education. And we've just completed a slide set that can also be used for education across the state regarding sexual assault and sexual abuse exams for children. So we did get some work done during this pandemic, which I think will be really helpful for the Commonwealth as we move forward in the future. We also, as part of CAC Kentucky, which I'm proud to say really took the lead in this project, we're working on creating, we're almost at the end of this project too, creating a website to house important medical information for emergency physicians and other providers that they can access quickly when they have a child that presents to their office or emergency department setting. We're working, and we've been working to establish some networks to create some peer review avenues within the state as well. And our hope is that we will be able to capture with this project that Laura talked about, and through education initiatives, a lot more children that don't come to the attention to CACs within the state. I will say that, as far as the kids that I talked to you about, when I walked the little boy out the door, I told him how brave he was for, being able to make his disclosure, and thanked him for coming. And he said to me, well, thanks. I'm glad I came too. So I just wanted to share that with you. And the little girl and her mother were very appreciative that, she just felt really good that she was not what she called damaged. So I think it means a lot to kids to be able to start on that road to healing. I think, I don't want to minimize it because they do have a long road forward. But we want to be in the position from the Children's Advocacy Center to really, help them start that process. And so I'll leave this in your handout. These are just some of the things that I've already talked about. I've left you with lots of reading material and homework if you want to do it. And I thought just Laura and I would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. And I really appreciate your presentation. It's a lot, but it's a lot that we all need to know. And it's a lot because I was just talking with Ben up here. Our numbers, I think we're going to just see an explosion in numbers once kids get back in school, once kids start to activities. I mean, it's this is not the time, to your point, to decrease anything or minimize this situation that we're going to find ourselves. So I appreciate your testimony. Senator Westerfield has the first question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Doctor, thank you for sharing. Laura, good to see you. Appreciate you, and I appreciate the work of the statewide board, which I was proud to be a member of for several years. Huge fan and thankful, immeasurably thankful for every one of the CACs around the state and the work that they do. And they're all, at least in Christian County, in the Pennyrile area, the Pennyrile Children's Advocacy Center is not something a lot of people are aware is there. But man, when the families need that service, when they need that provision, it's an incredible and challenging and heartbreaking thing for families to go through. But I'm so thankful that they are there, and there are staff and caring, loving professionals there willing to do that important work. You mentioned, and the chair just made reference to this, on one of the slides, Laura, you showed the number of cases was 7,100 and something in 19, and then dropped to 5,500, and it's back to a projection of 7,000 some odd. Just another bit of proof, Madam Chair and Mr. Chairman, that kids out of the classroom, obviously that didn't mean that the abuse didn't happen. It meant we didn't see it happening. It wasn't being reported, it wasn't being caught, and it wasn't getting referred to the caring professionals at our CACs and other providers around the state. And that it's frightening and scary because I know that the abuse still went on. No reason to think it didn't. You mentioned, Laura, a number of amounts of money that you all are asking for or that you're getting from this resource or that. But one that jumped out was $900,000 for a mental health professional in each one of the CACs. I'd give you any penny you asked for. I would vote for it in a heartbeat, blindly. I'd fully fund and fully staff every CAC in the state. But in my private practice, I represent a community mental health center, and I was just curious whether or not any of the CACs are partnering with the CMHCs in their area to provide that mental health staff, and if they aren't, because there's a CAC that serves every county, and the community mental health centers serve every county. There's not a physical presence necessarily in every single county, but they serve every one of the counties. So I'm curious if that's not something that can be done if it's not already being done.
In several children's advocacy centers, there are specific affiliate agreements in place with the community mental health centers for, particularly for a subset of therapists who would have the trauma training to be able to provide the specific trauma services. So that is a resource that many of the centers do use. And this request is more concerning with the American Rescue Plan funds more specific to the anticipated increase in need for trauma-specific services. And but yes, many of the centers have some kind of referral or affiliate agreement with either community mental health or both community mental health centers and additional mental health providers in their region. Because, the map that you can see, even with the satellite locations, there's not a location convenient for every family to have ongoing in-person therapy services. But, centers have also increased their use in telemental health services as well. And much like the difference between the emergency room and a children's advocacy center, there can be some significant differences between where you go to receive services depending on your region. And many kids feel more comfortable returning to the Children's Advocacy Center to work on their trauma issues because they know that those staff already know their story, they already know why they're coming there, and they're already comfortable there.
And they may not have to retell it multiple times and times again. If I may, Madam Chair, thank you. Does the 900, would that put a mental health professional in all 15 or only in the ones that don't currently have an agreement with a CMHC?
This would be for all 15. And several do have their own mental health therapists already, but this would be an additional position.
Okay. Thank you, Laura. I appreciate it. Please give my regards to the board and to your member CACs. I'm thankful for them.
I will. Thank you.
We have Senator Berg next.
Thank you. Thank you for a interesting, disturbing presentation. This is, information that we have to know. And my question doesn't require an answer today, but I'm wondering specifically, Dr. Sugarman, here in Kentucky, we require certain education on an annual or every other year for physicians, like HIV and opioid epidemic. Would there be an advantage to requiring some education either on the medical school level or the residency level or on the physician level, on an annual or semi-annual, every other year basis, that a requirement to better educate our general healthcare providers in this state as to what to look for, how to be aware, how to refer patients, just better educate our healthcare providers on what signs and symptoms we're looking for and what recourses we have in this state. I know we don't teach our residents about this. So I'm just wondering if that would be something that you think would be helpful.
Yeah, I think that, I know physicians don't like requirements, but I do think that it would be helpful for people to know, especially how to report, what their obligations are, and what, what kind of signs and symptoms to at least make you think about sexual abuse.
Just as a quick follow-up, honestly, if we're number one in the country, I would think that even though you're right, physicians don't like requirements, but that might be just a really easy starting space. Require our healthcare providers to get up to speed on this subject and to be eyes and ears and helpful hands as to where you send your patients and what you do and what options you have. I think that could be a very productive place to begin. I really do.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Okay, next up is Representative Banta.
Yes, I'm sorry. Dropped the phone. I was just curious, and thank you for your presentation. It was awesome. How do you work well, or do you work well, or is there anything you need from the police? Because I assume, in my head, I immediately want to go to punishment. So do you have a seamless march to jail for people that are the abusers?
Well, this is where the multidisciplinary team approach comes in, and law enforcement is definitely a key partner in the MDT process. And so they are involved in the cases. But that is something that is a challenge when you have a team of people who work together, but you basically, in some regards, don't have a coach. You think about even the best team with the best skills and being able to coordinate the services with law enforcement. And that's been one of the biggest areas of feedback we've had on our pilot project is the improved communication with law enforcement at the initial phases of the investigation, which helps their ability to be the best investigator that they can be as well when they're involved early and can be there for the forensic interview and can be really active and a key part of that investigation. So, that's definitely that MDT approach is to partner with law enforcement.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. You referenced the $2 million from the ARPA funds, the federal funds. What's the status on that? Did you request them from the governor's office? Did you request it through the cabinet? And are you assured of getting those dollars?
This is the unveiling of our request, I believe, today, and then
Okay.
it will be taken to other entities within the state government as well.
Okay, and so the $2 million is just to kind of get you back up to speed to handle the flow that we anticipate coming, I guess particularly in August, so that there is some time sensitivity to that request. You also mentioned the $5 million for the general fund. Are those dollars mainly in your brain going to this multidisciplinary approach to implement that, or are they just dollars that are needed to keep up with how we need to handle this crisis that we're in?
Right. This would be to expand that pilot project with the larger involvement in the multidisciplinary approach, which will also increase the number of services provided. If we're seeing more children through the coordination, then we're going to be providing more forensic interviews, more victim advocacy services. So it takes into account the staffing needed to coordinate the teams as well as to provide the direct services to the children.
Just two more quick questions. And I think one of the struggles, that at least I've been educated on, a struggle is that Medicaid has not increased its reimbursement rates for a lot of the activities that you all perform. Is that something that can be targeted when we update our state health plan? Is that something that we need to have a waiver on? Is that something, how do we, are we just stuck in an old reimbursement rate that will never see the light of day? Can you help me understand that?
Sure. Currently in the regulation, there is a Medicaid regulation specific to children's advocacy centers to have specialized children's medical clinics, and it does have a set reimbursement rate of $538 that's been the same rate for 20 years. We actually looked up when that regulation went into effect originally, and it was 20 years ago next month, I believe. And so that rate has not increased.
For anybody in any state, is that right?
Well, this is a Kentucky specific.
Okay.
This is specific to Kentucky with this regulation. The regulation also limits reimbursement for Medicaid to a physician providing the exam, whereas our standards regulation has opened up for advanced practice nurses to also be able to complete the same training and participate in the same peer review and be able to provide exams, but children's advocacy centers are not able to bill Medicaid for those exams. So there's kind of a mismatch between the standards regulation and the Medicaid regulation as far as providers as well.
I think that is an area that we should try to figure out how we keep them connected, but disconnect them so that we can hopefully increase some dollars coming in. Okay, and then the last thing I'll say is the reason that reimbursement rate is so low, is that why you need to bring in those trust fund dollars? I know that there was testimony before you that they used to give $150, or they used to give $75, and now they give $150 to try to make up those provider costs. Is that kind of where all this stems from?
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Just trying to get it all correct in my brain here as we move forward. Are there any other questions from any committee members? Okay. Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. We will continue to be in conversations because these are such important issues, and I think we can figure out some directions to go that can help everybody involved. So thank you, and thank you to everybody who attended the committee today. Okay, Ben is so on it. I was looking for my agenda. So our next Child Welfare Oversight and Advisory Committee is Wednesday, August 11th. So mark it down, Wednesday, August 11th. And if there are no objections, then we stand adjourned.